This episode is presented by Mercury, the fintech that simplifies how more than 200,000 businesses operate. Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. I'm Rebecca Bellan, and this is our Wednesday episode where we home in on a trend in the tech world and dive deep. Today, we're talking to Zander Brumbaugh, founder of Gamebeast, a startup that offers Roblox developers tools like A/B testing and LiveOps to modify games without needing to release a new version or interrupt a user's ongoing game. This is standard stuff in the gaming industry that, for whatever reason, was missing from Roblox, and Zander caught that and decided to make a business out of it. So, Zander, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Now, Gamebeast recently raised a $3.7 million pre-seed led by J2 Ventures with participation from A16Z Speedrun and others. And I believe you're working with around 40 developers so far. You're in talks with the US military about a no-code platform that can be used. You're also, I just want our listeners to know, only 22. You already have a lot under your belt. And aside from your startup, I'd actually love to hear a little bit more about your background, your consulting background, the book you've written. Tell us a little more about yourself.
Absolutely. So I've been on the Roblox platform a little over 10 years now, and I've created a bunch of top games, some of which even were number one on the platform for a time. And my time on the platform, my games have been played around 500 million times globally. Some peaks at over 80,000 concurrent users. Got a few physical toy lines that were distributed across the US and retail stores. And I also wrote a best-selling book series called Coding Roblox Games Made Easy. And yeah, so at my previous company, I was working with a bunch of Hollywood studios and publishers to bring their IP to the Roblox platform and the UGC space more generally. So I was consulting for NBC, Universal, Netflix, and Paramount. And it became abundantly clear, as you mentioned, this type of tooling has been standard for a long time for traditional and mobile gaming, but no one had yet offered this to developers on Roblox or in the UGC space. And that's where I saw not only a real opportunity, but a real need.
Yeah, for those who don't know, UGC means user-generated content. And I do want to talk to you a bit about this theme because I feel like I'm noticing it is a real trend. It's rising in popularity. And I think you even said that from your end, you're seeing that there's been some more investment into user-generated content or UGC games. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. The growth for these UGC platforms is certainly significant. I mean, definitely double-digit year-over-year growth in the US. And I think it's lost on a lot of people how big this market already is. I mean, for Roblox alone, there's over 350 million monthly active users at this point, around 80 million daily active users.
Wow.
For UEFN, so that's Unreal Engine for Fortnite, which is sort of their own sort of Roblox-style platform for user-created content. Still over 100 million MAU there, and creators on both platforms are taking home hundreds of millions of dollars annually. So it's certainly the trend towards UGC gaming is continuing. I had a fun little data point as well where last holiday season, 70% of kids in the US, 16 and under at least, asked for virtual currency for these types of platforms, so be it Robux or V-Bucks, over standalone game titles. So that's pretty shocking to think about just the total market capture it has on this younger generation especially.
Yeah, Robux is the currency for Roblox, right? And then what was it? V-Bucks? Is that for Fortnite?
V-Bucks is correct.
Yeah, so Fortnite. So, most people know Fortnite for, Battle Royale and everything, but there's the creative pillar, I guess you can say, as you were discussing, that is really growing in popularity. I think it's actually growing the most in popularity. While Battle Royale is still the most popular, this is absolutely starting to take over. And there's something to this value add of being able to have people produce the content that they want to play, I guess? Why is it so popular?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a pretty natural progression for a lot of people, even if you think, even back, let's say 20 years ago when people were just playing video games on consoles or, maybe PCs also at the time, of course. Anyone who is really a gamer who enjoys playing games will sooner or later be inspired probably to make one of their own. It's just that for such a long time, the barrier to entry was so high that it wasn't really feasible for someone to go out and just, completely learn a particularly difficult programming language, learning about the engine and everything else. And so I think just the fact that these platforms make it extremely easy to make content from a young age. I mean, certainly so many developers I know got their start around the same age I did. I started when I was 12 and taught myself how to program in Lua and kind of learn my way around the Roblox engine. So I think just people being able to creatively express themselves and make games that they themselves enjoy, and then also turn that, be it into just a profitable hobby or, for in many cases, a career. That's a really exciting thing.
I was just thinking as you were talking, I was like, wow, this is so unique to the gaming industry, but it's really not actually. This sort of almost like decentralization. It's not that you need these big legacy companies to create games or anything anymore. I mean, there's people have used Substack for their own newsletters, and there's, all these tools available to make your own podcasts and everything. And everyone, it seems like the online space is just kind of flush with creators generally at the moment. And, as we look at the video game space, I mean, VC funding is down, whatever. VC funding is down pretty much everywhere across the board. But I will say that I looked at recently in preparation for this talk, a JP Morgan analysis that found that, most investment is actually going into content development startups when we're talking about the video game space in general. And 2024 looks like it could end up with about 5.5 billion in gaming, which is the third highest year on record. It really does seem like content is the most important thing. It's the trendiest thing, but content is going to be changing, right? As we have AI, we've got generative AI. How do you see that changing the developer space today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest opportunities with generative AI actually goes back to something we were touching on earlier, where previously the barrier to entry for making content has been so high that it's been inaccessible essentially to so many people. So I think this is where a lot of companies are investing for that reason, or at least certainly in the case of Roblox, a lot of their recent investment into generative AI tech is towards models that enable you to, say, just type text and go from, what you describe to a 3D model, or even, from what you type to an entire game world, and be able to iterate based on that. So I think that generative AI in different workflows can definitely, accelerate timelines, allow developers to iterate more quickly, and also just enable more people to actually develop games of their own. You really can't discuss AI, especially in creative spaces, without there being kind of an immediate knee-jerk negative reaction from a lot of people in the community, because their perception, is that AI was trained on data. Like, a lot of people care about where the data was sourced from, because, did this come from other artists? Is it going to replace artists? But ultimately, I think that even as models get better, the best thing is always going to be integrating these types of models into a workflow, making something easier for developers. Like, I've seen some incredible AI models that enable 3D modelers to essentially fix the topography. So basically the actual, geometry that you don't see for a 3D model, it allows them to just work quickly, and then it actually refines that, makes sure that the game runs correctly. So I think that there's a lot more nuance and layers kind of to AI technology, where you would put that in your development workflow, where it's not always just the final product that is going to be super useful to people in the industry and just enable people to, again, move more quickly and develop more overall.
I guess my concern with everything when it comes to generative AI is, yes, it'll give us so many more tools to be able to produce more quickly, and for more people, it just lowers the barrier to entry, democratizes development. But will it get to a point where humans aren't needed for developing games at all? Or where, kids today, if they're learning with all of these sweet tools that are very easy to use, no code, will they know how to code? Will they be able to use that part of their brains? Will they be able to try to fix problems inside? Will they need to? I guess, I don't know, it's more of a philosophical question, I suppose. But you're young enough that it matters for you more than me.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I would say on the front, anyone around my age or older, I don't think that pure AI content creation is something that they're totally going to accept unless the technology within the next few years becomes indiscernible in quality, which personally I don't foresee. My background in research is in artificial intelligence, specifically in language models. So kind of the underlying technology of, say, ChatGPT, just for one example. So I guess coming with perhaps a different perspective to a lot of people, I view this type of technology differently, both in terms of it doesn't seem as much of a magic trick. Once you kind of look at the math, it's pretty mundane, but certainly the results are very fluent and, surprising and seem very natural and human. Certainly in the text medium, as we've seen again with ChatGPT, just as a single example, but as it then extends to image generation or video or, more aspirational, like just describing a whole world and then it gets generated, there's more work to be done. But certainly, if you just look at where we were 12 months ago versus today, I think that AI progress has been so quick that it's easy to lose track of just how impressive and the leaps and bounds we're making in such short order really are. So I guess to answer the other part of your question more directly, Yes, so we're democratizing development, but we're also, for young people who are using this type of technology, potentially, if they're not, actively saying, oh, I'm going to use this example to teach myself how to program, then yeah, I mean, I think if I didn't have the opportunity, and I suppose also we're not forced to learn a programming language in order to make this type of content, then I ultimately wouldn't be where I am today. And so that is a little bit concerning. I think it certainly has its reaches outside of game development as well. If we're thinking about more generally kind of just proficiency for people who are just using AI tooling to accomplish most every task in their daily life, then you're really dependent more on that technology than your own knowledge. That's, I think, its own whole separate conversation about the role of AI in education and everything else. But yeah, I mean, in the short order, I think there's a responsibility for people to hold themselves kind of accountable on that, though it's difficult to say that, maybe about a 10-year-old who's trying to just make a game.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe more so on the parents then.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, we end up using technology as a crutch without even realizing that we're doing it, right? I mean, I don't know if your parents ever try to give you directions somewhere and they're like, all right, so you're going to go down blah, blah turnpike and you're going to make a left. And when you see the Wendy's, and then I'm like, Mom,
right.
Stop.
Yeah.
I have Google Maps, please. This is never going to work, right? You just end
up. Did you print this
out
on MapQuest?
Yeah, oh my God. Wow, what a throwback. Okay, so would you say there's a difference the way AI is going to affect developers of user-generated content, people like yourself, people like my nephew, things like that? Will it affect the big dogs like Unity, like Unreal Engine differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it ultimately depends on, do those big players really lean into generative AI? Certainly they're using them in a lot of their own workflows. I think for metahumans, which is, this hyper realistic sort of humanoid system that Unreal, or I guess Epic, developed for Unreal, among others. I think they're certainly going to take advantage of that technology because at its core, before the buzzwords, it's just still machine learning, which enables a lot of technical ability that wouldn't necessarily be tractable otherwise. I think more to your question, though, about the dynamic between the technology and game developers, I think it's actually most likely to affect people on user-generated content platforms more. The reason for this is because, as we mentioned, the barrier to entry is lower. There's a lot more, not even strictly casual games. It's less the nature of the games and more how content is produced and discovered. So if you're a small developer, you're really dependent for organic growth on the discovery algorithm, the recommendation engine. And, this is something that I've cared about for a long time. And so one of the reasons, at our company, we're trying to kind of make it more transparent, the different types of algorithms on this platform. Because if you're a small developer, you really want to just be focused on making what you want to actually make instead of being completely just chasing the algorithm, right? Just trying to make something that you think will become popular. And the same is true for large studios, even, where if they can just focus on making good content and engaging with their communities, then it's better than just chasing the algorithm purely. But to how the dynamic between the technology and developers, if developers on these UGC platforms, especially small ones, are competing with, a lot of mass-produced, let's say, AI content, then I think that actually makes it more difficult, or pretty, I think even with today's technology, foreseeably, especially with some of the models I was discussing before, you could even have kind of, networks of just agents or, AI bots essentially that are just generating their own games, kind of iterating based on a whole bunch of signals from either in the game or external sources, and then just producing tons of content, releasing new games. And yeah, and essentially there'd just be tons of AI content being released consistently. Today, I don't think it would be anything of quality.
Right.
But
the old AI slop hits the video game industry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was the word. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, this leads me to, I saw a survey conducted by Bain & Company that video game industry executives believe that Gen AI would manage more than half of game development within 5 to 10 years, which is up from less than 5% today. So yeah, I think that we will probably see quite a lot of that. Zander, we could probably talk about Gen AI forever and ever, but we do have to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about the A16Z Speedrun Accelerator and what that experience was like for you. I'm wondering, this is a very fluid time for every industry because of AI. What are the conversations that you're having with investors like, right? You just raised this pre-seed, you did A16Z's Speedrun Accelerator. So what are they thinking? What are the headwinds that they think you might face, the tailwinds?
On generative AI specifically?
Well, just in the industry in general, I just assume that, when they're doing their due diligence, they're considering possibilities with generative AI, but I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think both they're bullish on AI and the proliferation of UGC, more generally, user-generated content. maybe that leads into when they're doing their due diligence, like how do we plan to utilize that technology? In fact, that was a question, I think, at least at A16Z that came up directly. So kind of looking back about democratizing some of these resources towards discoverability and success, something that we've been building out is automated insights. So, a lot of people, especially on Roblox and UGC platforms more generally, are sort of realizing the importance of data and analytics pretty simultaneously, just in kind of a big wave where, they're considering the algorithm. They're maybe struggling on discovery where, they've been doing this for 10 years and they've just developed great intuition, but now they may actually be running into some issues. And so now they're really kind of turning their heads towards the data-driven approach. And you can put charts in front of them. You can just give them the raw data, high-level analytics. But if they don't know how to, essentially read those and then turn that into something actionable, it's not necessarily the most useful. So something we've been building out, which was pretty exciting to investors, was the ability to have automated insights. So, you release a change, you have this feedback from your community in game, you have, whatever analytics or metrics that you're tracking, and you're able to attributably say, you made this change, and based on this, your community is saying this type of feedback towards that feature, and it caused this impact to your stats, be it good or bad, right? And so that gives them an actual actionable insight to be able to iterate on, and as well as teach them, attribute it to this part of the graph, say this is where you can see this change over time, so that they can actually gain those skills while also understanding in the short term what they need to do. And I think that's something really exciting to a lot of the developers we've talked to, as they're really, again, kind of shifting to this more data-driven approach over just intuiting what they might do to resonate better with their audience, or in some cases, just shooting in the dark, truthfully. Mm-hmm. And I think for especially internationally, where maybe there are less resources towards those regions, be it like in terms of documentation or otherwise, or just less experience on this platform because it's newer in that market, I think that's also like really exciting to those developers that we've talked to.
Yeah. I wonder, were any of your conversations with investors, how did you get into the talks with military to use the platform? Was it for similar kind of analytics products like this? Was that something that you thought would be a good idea? Or did your investors say, hey, by the way, everyone at the moment seems to be taking a chunk out of the military's budget for whatever reason? How did that conversation go?
Yeah, so our lead investor, J2, they're a dual use VC. So kind of the thesis of their investments always involves both a commercial and either a medical or defense application. And my co-founder as well, in his previous experience, before we met on a previous gaming startup, he was operating sort of on dual use applications of research and defense again. And also I come from a military family. I've come from 3 generations of Navy, so I've always been pretty closely connected to that world. And really what we saw was an opportunity that in the same way that developers can understand down to the player level kind of their interactions between the players and the games, or you could think the player and the simulation, we saw a great opportunity and defense need across at a high level wargaming. This is where the Department of Defense has been investing more of their own resources across various branches of the military to make these simulations more accurate, just as, geopolitically kind of just global situation changes, evaluating different theaters. It's proven itself really important. And, in recent conflicts, sometimes our wargaming outcomes were not the same as the actual outcomes. So more clearly understanding what the possibilities are, understanding what the interactions are down to the individual actions of a service member and what the outcome is of the simulation, understanding how they're interacting with other people in the simulation. So kind of like that multiplayer focus in a game transfers over rather directly to service members cooperating in a simulation. And so really just providing detailed analytics and insights on that front is somewhere where there's a real defense need. And so that's where we're operating.
Yeah, good to have that dual use, I think. In today's world, everyone's gotta hustle.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's just a great opportunity through there for defense through deterrence, just strengthening the position of the U.S. and our allies before it comes to conflict.
And just touching back on the A16Z Speedrun Accelerator, which is what helped you get the funding that you've just received. What was that experience like? Like, any advice for others who might want to try to join that one or a similar accelerator?
Absolutely. I mean, the experience at Speedrun was incredible. We actually applied pretty much with just an idea and a very basic proof of concept for what we wanted to build, but still, as we mentioned during the talk here, a very clear demonstrated opportunity and need. we heard back on pretty short order. And, for 3 months from January to March, or 2.5 months, really just kind of heads down building out the product. And being in person with my team in San Francisco, working with the partners at A16Z, they'd bring in excellent mentors each week. So we had Mark Pincus, who's founder of Zynga. We had a bunch of executive producers from major games like League of Legends. So really just being able to talk with those people who have really lived it in industry and were relevant to whatever subject we were discussing that week, be it go-to-market, managing teams and talent, finding product market fit. That was really pretty invaluable. I mean, aside from the capital, just the mentorship and who you'd be able to get to know based through, actually working on that area was definitely something that guided us as we built out the product and was certainly useful as we, then led around.
Any other themes, other startups in the cohort? Like what were some themes that you were seeing? Was UGC taking over? Was any other sectors being promoted in this video game space?
Yeah, I mean, I think UGC made up a decent block of the cohort. So we were the only platform operating primarily on Roblox. There were a few on UEFN, as we've mentioned, but also there were some that were kind of developing their own sorts of UGC platforms where it was a lot of community-driven content towards gaming, sort of games that were modular. You could just easily put them together and play with your friends, just really building on social and connectivity features, which is, again, really the underlying driving factor behind any of these platforms is the social interaction and engagement. And then on the topic of generative AI, I'd say probably a third to 40% of the companies in the cohort were primarily focused on generative AI for a bunch of different applications. Some were more focused on content production. Some were more on the workflow, as I had mentioned before. And there was definitely some great technology in there. And then, of course, the rest was content itself. So just people making games, bringing content to the market across a whole bunch of different domains. So be it anime or cozy games. So yeah, it was really diverse.
I'm wondering, for user-generated content startups like yourself, you're serving user-generated content platforms. What is your exit plan, right? Like in a lot of the tech world, it's kind of run by these larger companies, big monopolies. The only thing for startups to do is really get acquired. We're in an IPO drought. It's difficult to grow otherwise. Do you see that happening for Gamebeast, or for companies like yours as well? Is the path to an exit usually just an acquisition in this space, or?
Yeah, so I guess if you're asking more generally, certainly, the market conditions have it set up for companies that are operating mostly in this space to be acquired, be they content or technology companies. In fact, there have been a few major acquisitions of even just individual titles on the Roblox platform for tens of millions or even around $100 million. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a path for a lot of companies that operate in the space. Again, our thesis, for Gamebeast specifically is UGC, and certainly both the data and personal belief, I believe in its proliferation. And so I think as the existing platforms and their ecosystems mature, as new platforms emerge and grow, we're going to be there to support them. And I think that, as a significant portion of the gaming industry continues to move that direction, we're really well positioned, just given the long native expertise in this space, being there before it was cool, if you will, before certainly it was as popular and had its instances of mass discovery. It's just put us in a really advantageous position to be able to execute and succeed and be really well connected and understanding of the actual developers in this ecosystem.
Okay, well, before I let you go, any predictions for the next, I normally would say 10 years, but, everything moving so quick, so maybe the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would not be surprised if we're looking at around half of gaming market share actually being UGC over standalone titles. I think that certainly as we were talking about kind of engagement with the younger demographics, already for half of kids in the US, 16 and younger, they're engaging with Roblox alone daily. So depending on the demographic we're trying to cite, we already have that market share. But in terms of absolute gaming market share, I think it will continue to trend towards UGC. I mean, we've been talking about this through the lens of gaming this entire time, but, perhaps it's lost its charm. But earlier, maybe 15 years ago, the appeal of YouTube was that it was for filmmakers. They could create their own content and videos on the platform. Maybe now with short form content being everything, maybe you could equate like as Roblox is to gaming, TikTok is to video, right? And so I think that
little mini games.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Like it's easy just to jump into any game. There's no download. Content is driven algorithmically. There are a lot of parallels, certainly, but just how people like to engage, and again, the underlying factor just almost purely being social engagement and interaction. I think that, a little philosophical again, but I think it ties to deeper human nature, right? We want to be connected and play with other people as opposed perhaps to playing by ourselves if given the choice. So I think that that's just going to be a natural evolution in gaming.
And you say that togetherness, and I wonder if you imagine what, as Meta announces its insane augmented reality glasses, and they're really making a push for VR as well. And, obviously Apple's come out with their headset. Do you see that taking off, I suppose, in the next 5 to 10 years, this kind of really immersive way to be together in a gaming environment?
Yeah, I'd say, and I guess maybe this is a hot take. I don't think it is personally, but I think part of the lack of growth for VR in terms of user adoption is just, short of form factor and physicality of the actual systems, which I guess is a big contributing factor, is just the lack of experiences for them, right? Like we have kind of these niche, nobody's actually investing a lot of time into making good VR experiences, in my opinion. Actually, last year, when the Meta Quest Pro released, right after it released, they extended its support to Roblox, and that was their biggest single day growth of gaming users on the Meta Quest Pro. I think they saw 1 million downloads in 2 days or 3 days. It was pretty impressive. Basically, it just connected you through VR to this larger ecosystem of existing content and games and social interaction at the same fidelity you would be at on PC or mobile or anything else. So I think that was, kind of a great moment of proof that, there is opportunity here, and the focus will be togetherness. It will be socially driven content. And yeah, so I think that there is a real chance for VR or potentially AR gaming and growth in the near future.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think we're about out of time. Do you have socials that you can share with our listeners? Where can we find you?
Definitely, yeah. I exist on Twitter. There you go. Or excuse me, X.
No, we can call it Twitter. That's okay.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll dead name.
Yes, right. Yeah, my Twitter is Zanbrum, Zanbrum. You can find me on there. Yeah, I'm also on LinkedIn, just Zander Brumbaugh.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks. Well, again, thank you for joining us on the show. To our listeners, you can find me on Twitter/X at Rebecca Bellan, and also on Threads at @RebeccaBellan_writes. And you can find Equity on X and Threads at EquityPod. Talk to you Friday.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.